Alright, so today we're talking still, why did the Europeans become more involved in Africa? We already spoke about the slave trade, we already spoke about North Africa, and today we are going to talk about South Africa, like Algeria, another settler colony. So how did Africans and Europeans interact in South Africa? Now, South Africa has the longest history of European contact, or longest history of European colonization, I should say. Now, one of the reasons is the Cape of Good Hope. Now, the Cape Colony was under British rule until the formation of the Union of South Africa in 1910. However, the Dutch began settling there in 1652. So, and I'm sorry again about if you can be here, if you are able to hear the noises. But in 1652, we have the Cape of Good Hope was established by the Dutch, and it was the first European colony in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, settlements, and here you can see the Dutch landing in 1652. Now, settlement grew very steadily because you have immigrants coming in from other European countries, not just the Netherlands, in particular places like England. Part of that reason is it is a good strategic location. This is prior to the Suez Canal being built, so this is the way to get to India. So the Cape of Good Hope is an important way station along the way. In addition, again, the climate is Mediterranean and very favorable to farming, and those types of activities can be carried out very easily there. Now, in 1708, the population of the Cape was 1,700 free citizens and 1,700 slaves. So, free slaves. Almost immediately, the Dutch, when they came in, began enslaving the people that they encountered in Cape Town. Now, by 1800, the population is 75,000. Of that 75,000, 1/3 is free, and then that leaves 2/3 to be slaves. So what we see set up here is a slave, as a plantation system that gets developed in the Cape Colony. Now, the Dutch that were living there were referred to as Afrikaners, or also referred to as Boers, which means farmers. So the Afrikaners are the Dutch settlers in South Africa. Now, the Dutch and the British displaced a lot of the local people. One local group of people, one local group of people, I thought my tongue was still working, that they displaced was this group, the Khoikhoi, and they were basically displaced so that the Dutch could come in and farm their land instead. And their chiefdoms basically dissolved. They dissolved because of warfare by the Dutch, because of displacement by the Dutch, and because of smallpox. Some of these people were taken as slaves. Now, with the Napoleonic Wars, we were talking about that in regards to Egypt, but with the Napoleonic Wars, Cape Colony switches hands from the Dutch to the British. And the British law and social practices were instituted, like a limited republican government and an abolishment of the slave trade. Because in England, in 1834, slavery was abolished in the British Empire. So no longer could the Dutch enslave the African people in Cape Colony, because now it was a British colony, but still the Europeans controlled the best lands. The former slaves became wage workers, and by no means were they landowners. There was a lot of property restrictions that kept the Africans away from political power. In 1856, basically, there was a act passed called the Masters and Servants Act. So 1856, the Masters and Servants Act what this did is it limited the freedom of black workers, especially in their freedom of geographical movement. So we see that they're being assigned homelands where they are allowed to live, and they are not allowed to live wherever they want within their own country. This Masters and Servants Act, we are going to see, is going to be the roots of something that we're going to talk about for modern South Africa, something that's referred to as apartheid, which is going to be a policy that's going to be in place in South Africa until the 1990s. So we start to see this physical separation of the races. Now, basically, the Dutch descendants did not feel that there was enough limits placed on the Africans' freedom, and they opposed British rule and the more liberal customs of the British. So what they decided is they decided to leave in what becomes known as the Great Trek. And they decided to separate from Britain and search for new lands. Now, this went on from 1835 to 1838. Approximately 12,000 Boer frontier farmers migrated north to escape British authority. Now, while they were migrating, they had a great deal of conflict with local groups like the Zulus, because, like I said before, they really weren't keen on giving the Africans proper land or rights, and they felt that they had superiority over them, so the Zulus did not really take too kindly to that, and the Zulus and the Boers clash. But what the Dutch eventually do is set up 3 colonies: Natal, the Orange Free State, and Transvaal. And you can see this map here, where the Orange Free State and where Transvaal is, and then you could see where Natal is when the British when they move north. Now, what happens though is everything's pretty okay. So we have these separate republics, and they're kind of keeping to themselves. Now, what kind of caused problems, like I said before, there were problems between the various different groups of people, in particular the Zulus. So in 1816, this man here, Shaka Zulu, seized leadership in the Zulu kingdom. He had a standing army of 40,000 soldiers. They were armed with short stabbing spears. They were really good in hand-to-hand combat. But Shaka was essentially assassinated, and these people were displaced. So the British fought with the Zulu nation. They lost. Shaka was assassinated. And basically, as the British and the Dutch were expanding, they were forced to move. And they moved to places like Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Tanzania. And the Zulu nation pretty much was disbanded. But this was one of the more stronger resistances. You can see Zulu warriors. This is one of the more stronger resistances to European imperialism, even though they failed. Now, the other big issue that happened was in 1870, diamonds were discovered. And so when diamonds were discovered, and the world's largest diamond mine, gold deposit, was discovered in 1880, is the British, who were originally content to leave the Dutch to themselves in their various different new kingdoms, the British now are beginning to have an interest in these areas. And we start to see the tensions between the British and the Boers increase. So the British moved to annex Transvaal. The Boers fought the British in Transvaal, regained their independence. A man by the name of Paul Kruger becomes president. In the 1880s, gold is discovered, like I said before, then also in Transvaal, and this led to something known as the Boer War. So the Boer War lasted from 1899 to 1900. The Boers numbered about 88,000, whereas the British numbered 450,000. As a result, you can imagine, the Boers did not wind up being victorious. They were kind of like frontiersmen in their covered wagons, not very well organized and not very well armed. Meanwhile, the British were incredibly well armed, disciplined, and organized. Here you could see the covered wagons of the Boers. And a British war correspondent during this war was actually Winston Churchill. But what happened is in 1910, Britain decided to consolidate the colonies of Cape Town and Natal and the 2 other Boer republics into what's known as the Union of South Africa. Now, the Union of South Africa becomes a self-governing colony. In 1913, whites in South Africa had the same political institutions as, say, Canada or Australia. The Europeans dominated the life of the colony, and South Africa was considered a settler colony, even though there was a white majority, but that white majority's rights were very, very limited as far as geographic movement, as far as educational opportunities, and as far as economic opportunities. So what I want you to think of as you think about all 3 of these videos, how does African imperialism fit into the framework for the broader causes of imperialism that we talked about at the beginning of this unit? So I want you to think about that, and I will see you in class soon.